This is Chapter 8 on Congress. We start out with what are the functions of Congress. And I listed a whole bunch here, different things. Let me say something about it. The most classic kind of function of Congress is to make the law. We all learned that probably in about the fourth grade, where it was said, the Constitution says that Congress will make the law, the President will enforce it, and the Supreme Court will interpret it. The second thing is to represent the public. So the job of a member of Congress is to make sure that they represent their constituents. The constituents for the House of Representatives would be a district. The whole country is divided into districts based on population. And the Senate is representing 2 senators from every state. By the way, that's another very undemocratic kind of situation. You have some states that are highly populated, like California, the most populated state, and you have small states like New Mexico, where there's one area code for the whole state, and yet both New Mexico and California have 2 senators. But anyway, their job of the representatives in the House of Representatives and the senators, their job is to represent their state if it's the Senate and district if it's the House. A third function is to oversee the executive branch. An example of that would be the investigation of 9/11, what happened there and how come the FBI knew at the base level or bottom level in New York who these people were and the top people didn't. So there's an investigation in Congress to try to figure out who's to blame and why and all that kind of thing. That happens over and over again where the function of the Congress is to investigate, and they can investigate anything they want because it isn't just investigate the president, it's investigate any problem where they think they might need to pass legislation. Even things where it doesn't appear to be legislatively possible to deal with, they still will investigate. For example, you had the investigation a few years ago of baseball players using steroids. And so I don't know what the intent was there, that what kind of legislation they were going to pass, but essentially they did that. A lot of times there's a political motive for investigations or oversight function because they want the publicity that they'll get by calling in famous people. Oftentimes you'll see famous people like movie stars appearing before congressional committees when they're doing some investigation, and that's so as to attract media attention and public attention to an issue. That happens all the time. Another function of Congress is to spend the money. They have what's called the power of the purse. That's the power of not only collecting the money but spending it. Another one is to investigate issues in order to pass legislation. That's essentially the same as the oversight function. They can investigate or hold hearings to get public attention on just about anything they think is worthy of passing legislation. The next thing is to educate themselves and the public on the issues. So when they do these investigations, one of the goals is to educate the public and also educate themselves about what's going on. That's why they call witnesses. Witnesses appear before the committees in order to educate the members of Congress about what's going on, like in the banking industry or whatever industry they're interested in talking about, or issues related to what's going on in the country. Another function is to propose amendments to the Constitution. Congress can start that process, call a constitutional convention for that purpose. So constitutionally they can be involved in the amendment process if they see a desire to pass amendments. The problem, of course, as I mentioned before, is that amendments are very difficult to pass, and as a result, you have very few of them in the whole existence of the country. Declare war, that's a classic one. One of the few times that the Constitution is very specific about the power of Congress, and it says that it has the power to declare war. Probably that's the most interesting one because the unwritten Constitution has changed that so that the Congress really doesn't have much at all to do with declaring war, going to war. That's all now in the hands of the president. Another one is to impeach the president and to impeach judges, could be Supreme Court judges or any judges in the system. But the job of impeaching the president, first, there's a kind of two-step process in impeachment. One is to bring the charges. That would be the role of the House of Representatives, and then the actual trial is in the Senate, presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And that's the entire process if they ever get through it. They got through part of it with President Clinton, and that's why he was technically called impeached. But anyway, the important thing at this point is just to remember that the impeachment power belongs to Congress. It's the House and the Senate together. Discipline their own members. Congress has the power to kick out people if they're doing wrongdoings, breaking the law, violating the law. That happens every once in a while, where a member of Congress will get caught. There was a thing called Arab Gate or something like that many years ago, where this impersonator of an Arab sheik tried to bribe members of Congress, and it was all videotaped by the FBI, and they caught some people, and then of course they got kicked out. There are other kinds of more recent examples, like, for example, some members of Congress have been caught with pages in sexual situations, and then they got kicked out for one reason or another too, or any ethical violations. You can see members getting disciplined. There's an ethics committee that starts the process, and then eventually there's a vote in the House or the Senate, wherever the person who committed the violations is sitting, and then that's what they do. They can just kind of kick them out. Rule on presidential disability, that's never happened in modern time, even though we've had presidents like President Reagan, who got shot, and he was disabled for a while. But the White House usually never gets to the point of notifying Congress of a disability. So in other words, they just handle it informally. Somebody else takes charge while the president is disabled. So that rule is really not so relevant. They can seat members in a disputed election. Sometimes elections are such that they're so close they can't really be counted. They'll count the vote, and then they'll have a recount and maybe another recount. And in the process, different results will be achieved. So they really can't count the votes. They really can't figure out who won. So in those kinds of situations, it's up to Congress to seat the person, and then they can decide. And usually it's very political. Everything in Congress is political. So what happens is that if the Democrats aren't in control, they're the majority party, then they'll pick the person who's a Democrat, and vice versa if the Republicans are in control. Choose the president if the electoral college is deadlocked. That hasn't happened and isn't likely to happen, but it's in the Constitution that the Congress has the power to pick the president if there's electoral situation where nobody gets elected. And then the last thing is the Senate can approve treaties, presidential appointment and judicial appointments, all of those things. Treaties, appointments are approved by the Senate, not the House. But anyway, those are all the functions. Usually the most important ones are to make the law, to represent, to oversee, and to spend the money. Those are usually the top ones. Everything else is less important, especially in this day and age. Number two, why is the president more powerful than Congress? That's a really interesting question because of the fact that the Constitution clearly makes Congress number one. Article 1 of the Constitution is all about Congress. Most of the power of the president belongs to, most of the power of in the Constitution belongs to Congress, not the president. And little or no power really started out belonging to the president. The founding fathers were much more likely to worry about presidential or executive power, so they trusted the Congress much more, and that's why the Constitution was written the way it was. But over time, the unwritten Constitution, the practices in history and culture of the United States have meant that not only is the president more powerful than Congress, but that the president, we have what I call a presidency-centered government, where, and these are some of the reasons why the president is more powerful than Congress. One is access to the media. The president has a lot more access to the media. Matter of fact, the president can get access to the media many different ways, which we talk about in the chapter on the president. Also, just about any time the president wants to give a speech, all he has to do is say he wants to give a speech, and the major media outlets, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, so on, Fox News, they'll all cover it. And then it'll be the talk of the town after the speech is given. So he gets access to the media. Wherever he goes, whatever he does, he gets access to the media. I remember when President Reagan was president in the 1980s, he would go on vacation back home to California, to the ranch he had in California. And he'd still be getting a lot of media coverage, even though he wasn't doing anything politically. He wasn't really involved in the government at the time. He was horseback riding and doing other things. They still covered all that. So access to the media is predominantly given to the president, not to Congress. The second thing, and this is very important in terms of power shifting to the president, is that the presidency is a centralized branch of government. That is, speaks with one voice. Everybody involved in the presidency, on the presidential side, even in the military and so on, speak with one voice. They represent what the president wants them to say. The talking points of the cabinet, Joint Chiefs of Staff, and everybody else is always going to be the same. It comes right out of the White House. So they look like there's unity. They look like they know what they're doing. They look like there's consensus on what's going on. And when you look at Congress, it's exactly the opposite. It's a decentralized branch. If you ask the Democrats, you get one set of answers. If you ask the Republicans, you get a different set. It looks like all they do is fight each other. It's nothing but a big-time debating society. And so the public doesn't have the confidence in the Congress that they're going to do anything about the issues, because the Democrats are saying we ought to go in one direction and the Republicans are saying we ought to go in another direction, and that doesn't generate confidence. But the presidency is very different. And if you, matter of fact, if you're anybody in the executive branch and you say something that contradicts the president, they'll kick you out the next day. Or anything that the White House doesn't want out there, you'll be gone. So there's a lot of people with dissenting views, but unlike in Congress, they're not going to say them as long as they're part of the government. Okay, a third thing is you have one-party control and versus two-party bickering. I think that's a good one. One-party control in the presidency. Everybody rallies behind the president. They're all going to be in agreement on the policies of the president. It's like a one-party domination versus two-party bickering. The Democrats and Republicans can't agree on much of anything, especially these days. And now with the presidential election in full swing, they're not going to even come close to working on things together. Number 4 is public expectations. Whenever there's a problem, whatever it is, like a 9/11 security problem kind of thing, or if we go back to the late 70s, early 80s, you had the boycott by the Arab countries with oil and a shortage of oil. Social security problem of maybe having too many people retiring at one time to put a burden on the system. Whatever it is, whatever the problem is, the public looks to the president to solve that problem, not to Congress. Congress's uh, prestige is really, really low, and even when the president's popularity is in the toilet, the Congress's is lower. So the public looks to the president. They blame the president. It is the president's responsibility to see to it that things are solved. A classic example of this problem was Katrina. When President Bush W was president, not his father, but him, W. And W, when he was president, it wasn't, he didn't know what the hell's going on in FEMA. He didn't really understand the ins and outs of that. And even if he was the most intelligent president we ever had, and he certainly wasn't, he would still not be able to keep a grasp on all this stuff because there's so many agencies, departments, and cabinets that he's responsible for. So the best he can do is get himself up to date when the crisis happens. But the public doesn't care about that. The public wants the president to be on top of everything, and if he isn't, he's going to be in trouble with them for it. So whenever there's a problem, they look for the president, not the Congress. And of course, the last one is that the president sets the national agenda. That is, the issues chosen as to what to work on, what's important, what the country needs to do is set by the president, not Congress. Congress rarely has their own agenda. The last time I can remember that Congress had an agenda that was different from the president was when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House. During that time, they set up this, I forget what you called it, the Agreement with America or something like that, which was a separate agenda that Congress was going to try to implement apart from the president. And that's the last time, and probably the only time, you'll ever see the Congress trying to go a separate way or trying to have a separate agenda. If you notice, if you look at the Republicans now, they control the House and the Senate. They have tried from time to time to set an agenda that's different from Obama, but they can't seem to do it. And they can't seem to do it because they can't come to consensus. There's too much bickering, even within the Republican Party, to decide, okay, what is our strategy going to be? What is our stance going to be in relationship to the president's position? For example, you have Obamacare, and you've had the Republicans complaining and complaining and complaining about Obamacare, but never offering a viable alternative to it because they can't come to agreement. So all of these reasons, access to the media, centralized versus decentralized, one party versus two-party bickering, public expectations, and the president setting the agenda, all result in the president being way more powerful. Okay, number three, what are some of the limitations on the power of the president? On the power of Congress, I'm sorry. What are some of the limitations on the power of Congress? Presidential veto, that's a classic one. Congress can pass a law, president vetoes it, then they have to get a 2/3 vote to pass over his head, and that's not likely to happen. Supreme Court can rule against the Congress, that they don't have the power, according to the Constitution, to do something, and that would limit them. A lack of party discipline, this is a big important one, that they can't control their own members. All you got to do is look at the Republicans now in the House and Senate. They have the majority, but it doesn't mean much because most of the Tea Party Republicans who got elected refused to follow the Republican leadership. Number four would be the inability of the parties to sanction their members. There's little or nothing they can do when members violate the rules and regulations of the parties. One of the classic examples of this would have been way back in the day when Joe Lieberman ran for vice president. Uh, that was, I believe, in the 80s. And when he was a vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, he was a Democrat. And then when the um, when the next election came along, and it was McCain running for president, Joe Lieberman endorsed McCain. I believe that's what it was. I can't remember the details exactly, but here he was, a Democrat, and he endorsed a Republican candidate for president of the United States. That's an absolute no-no in party politics. You always support the candidate of your own party. When George McGovern ran, for example, when he ran for president, his whole platform was an anti-war platform, an anti-President Johnson platform. And yet, when at the end of the campaign, President Johnson endorsed him because he was a Democrat running for president. So that's the kind of loyalty that's expected in the party. But here was Lieberman, who had been a vice presidential candidate in a losing cause in running for president, and then endorsing a Republican in the next election. The end result being that he did an absolute no-no, a kind of complete rejection of his party. And then when he ran again in the next election, he was able to win, and the party wasn't able to kick him out. So there just really is an inability of the parties to sanction their own members. And then, as I mentioned before, lack of congressional agenda. They don't set their own policy as to what they want to do. You think they could, but the reason that they can't is because they can't get agreement even within the party. And it's been the same whether it's the Democrats in the majority or the Republicans in the majority. They can't seem to get consensus among their own members, let alone the Congress itself. Okay, and then here's the last question. Why is it so difficult for the Congress to pass national legislation? First of all, there's the power of geographical minorities in Congress. Everybody represents a state or everybody represents a district. Doesn't matter how big the state is, you get representation. Places that are very small get 2 senators, like New Mexico, Wyoming, almost all the states in the West, some of the states in the South are pretty low in terms of population. And so they've got way more representation when you add up the members in the House and the members in the Senate. All you got to do, if you want to look at who are the really small states, just look at the number of people from a state that are in the House of Representatives, because that's based on population. And some states only have 1 representative, some have 2 or 3, and that's it. And that means that the state is really small. There's no real population in that state, and yet they have 2 senators. So these geographical minorities can outvote they can outvote the people who are representing the vast majority of people, which are in the big states like New York and California and Illinois and places like that. Second is decentralization. It's difficult to pass national legislation because the system, if you look at how a bill becomes a law, and a lot of you have probably seen that before, like even in high school, there's a committee system, there's 2 houses of the legislature, there's subcommittees and committees, and then the floor action, and then it goes over to the other house. So it's very, very decentralized. It can be stopped at any point in all that process. Subcommittee, committee, floor, second house, it all can be stopped. And that decentralization makes it very, very hard to pass legislation. Most legislation never gets anywhere. So the end result is that even though the public wants a lot of different things, the national polls show the public's in favor of making changes to the laws that reflect, more democracy or something like that. Like, for example, the income tax system. Most people don't like the income tax system the way it's set up, and they would like to change it. And that would be something that would affect us nationally. But again, it can't get it out of committee, or you can't get it past the second house, or you can't get it past a presidential veto. There's all kinds of ways to kill it, but there's a tremendous amount of decentralization in Congress, and that makes national legislation difficult. A lack of consensus on national legislation as well. Um, there isn't a lot of issues that everybody agrees to. This is a diversified country. It's something that's difficult to pass, and therefore something that is a problem in Congress. If there's a consensus in the public that polling shows, it doesn't mean there's a consensus in Congress, because again, Congress is representing these geographical minorities, not the public at large. So it's like the difference between the electoral vote and the popular vote. One represents everybody in the country regardless of where you live. The other represents areas of the country like states. Okay, and the last one is how a bill becomes a law makes it difficult to pass any kind of legislation. So everybody who's on the defensive is always in a better position than anybody who's on the offensive. That is to say, anybody who wants to change things, the offensive side, they are less likely to get what they want than people just trying to block things. If you're just trying to block legislation to keep things as the way they are, you're in good shape when it comes to Congress. And national legislation is always going to be offensive kind of legislation, something that's going to change what's currently going on now.